At exactly 5:14 a.m. on a humid salt-sprayed morning off the coast of Queensland, the horizon did not bring the sun, but the silhouettes of a dozen steel giants. There was no formal press release from the Pentagon, no televised warning to regional adversaries, and certainly no hesitation in the way the carrier strike group cut through the Pacific swells at a steady 30 knots. Suddenly, a pair of F-35 Sea Lightning IIs screamed toward the coastline, dropping below 2,000 feet and banking sharply in a display of raw, unadulterated power. No radio contact, no identification squawk, no warning, just the deafening roar of Pratt & Whitney engines tearing through the silence at 450 miles per hour. To the uninitiated, it looks like the opening gambit of a massive maritime invasion, a sudden escalation in a region already simmering with tension. Yet, as these multi-billion-dollar machines dance over the non-skid deck, it becomes clear that the adversary isn't just being watched. They are being invited to witness the most sophisticated shield ever deployed to the Southern Hemisphere. The arrival of a US carrier strike group in Australian waters is not merely a diplomatic visit, it is the physical manifestation of the peace through strength doctrine, reimagined for a new era of Pacific volatility. This is not just a floating airport. The flagship is a nuclear-powered behemoth, a $13 billion sovereign territory that spans over 4.5 acres of reinforced steel. Weighing in at over 1,000,000 tons and powered by dual A-1B nuclear reactors, it generates enough energy to sustain a medium-sized city, yet every watt is funneled into a singular lethal purpose: the total dominance of the sea and sky. To put this in perspective for those challenging the status quo, this single strike group processes more raw combat data in 60 seconds than most regional militaries handle in an entire week of maneuvers. It is an overwhelming concentration of high-tech violence and strategic leverage. By positioning this force off the Australian coast, the administration isn't just sending a message to Canberra, it is sending a warning to any encroaching power that the Southern Cross is now under the protection of the world's most advanced apex predator. This is a calculated display of overmatch, designed to remind the world that in the deep blue of the Pacific, the gap between being a participant and being a target is measured in American resolve. The first point of contact occurred at precisely 47 nautical miles a distance, where most radar systems see nothing but a cluttered horizon of sea spray and atmospheric noise. But on the bridge of the escorting Aegis destroyers, the picture was crystal clear. This is the debut of the Spy-6, the next-generation air and missile defense radar that has fundamentally rewritten the rules of naval engagement. Unlike the legacy systems of the past, the Spy-6 is an active, electronically scanned array powerhouse that doesn't just look, it dissects. It possesses the terrifying capability to track over 1,000 targets simultaneously with a resolution so fine it can distinguish between a high-speed fighter jet and a stray flock of seagulls at ranges exceeding 200 miles. For the adversary, the tactical surprise they spent years planning vanished the moment they crested the radar horizon. The Spy-6 effectively shatters three pillars of modern asymmetric warfare. It burns through the most sophisticated electronic jamming, detects sea-skimming missiles before they can hide behind the Earth's curvature, and turns supposedly stealth profiles into nothing more than brightly lit targets on a kill chain. This is the moment the hunter becomes the prey. The intruders, likely thinking they were ghosting through a blind spot in Australian defenses, were actually being painted by a beam of energy so precise it could identify the specific serial number of their airframes. Their advantage didn't just disappear, it was exposed as a dangerous, expensive illusion. In this high-stakes theater, the American radar didn't just find them, it welcomed them into a digital cage from which there is no escape. Deep within the bowels of the lead destroyer, the Combat Information Center is bathed in a dim, predatory blue light. There are no shouted orders and no frantic movements. The only sound is the low hum of cooling fans and the rhythmic tapping of keys. Here, operators remain hunched over high-definition displays, their faces illuminated by the digital glow of the Spy-6 feed. This is the heart of the American naval philosophy: no panic, just process. The protocol is a cold three-step machine. First, the unknown contact is instantly tagged with a unique track number. Second, the system verifies the signature against a massive library of known regional airframes. Within 45 seconds, the entire strike group from the carrier to the furthest flung submarine knows exactly what the intruder is, how fast it's going, and what it's carrying. The atmosphere is so clinical it borders on the mundane. There is plenty of time for the tactical action officer to take a slow sip of coffee before deciding whether to launch an intercept or simply continue the watch. To the Americans, this isn't a crisis, it's a Tuesday. 6:17 a.m. The response. The silence of the morning is shattered not by an alarm, but by the crisp voice of the air boss over the flight deck speakers. On the non-skid surface of the carrier, the choreography of the yellow shirts begins. This is the first real test of the Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System, or EMALS. Unlike the steam catapults of the past that required minutes to reset and stabilize pressure, EMALS is ready in seconds. Two F-35Cs are hooked into the shuttles. In a blur of gray steel and afterburner heat, they are accelerated from 0 to 170 miles per hour in just 270 feet, taking less than 2 seconds to clear the bow. Call signs Viper 1 and Viper 2 report airborne. Their mission is governed by strict code rules of engagement: intercept, identify, and shadow. They are the eyes of the fleet, instructed not to fire unless fired upon, but to make their presence felt with unmistakable clarity. 6:21 a.m. The escalation. As the first pair of American fighters reaches intercept altitude, the tactical displays in the CIC begin to flicker with new data. New contacts have emerged from the cloud bank to the north, 3 more F-16S, flying in a tight aggressive formation. The count quickly jumps from 3 to 6. This is no longer a random encounter, it is a coordinated provocation. In the Pentagon's lexicon, this is poking the bear. The intruders are testing the response time of the combined US. Australian air defense net pushing into the gray zone, where a single pilot's twitch could ignite a regional conflagration. 6:23 a.m. The silent shield. While the world looks at the sky, the real battle is happening in the electromagnetic spectrum. The escort destroyers, the USS Mason and Thomas Hudner, shift their spy 1D radars into passive mode. They aren't just tracking, they are vacuuming up every bit of SIGINT and ELINT the intruders are leaking. Every radio transmission, every radar pulse from the F-16S, and every encrypted data link is captured and logged. The Americans are essentially profiling the enemy's electronic soul. They are collecting everything: frequency hops, signal strength, and communication patterns, building a digital library that will be used to jam these exact planes in any future conflict. 6:24 a.m. Visual identification. Viper 1 pulls alongside the lead intruder. Through the cockpit glass, the American pilot sees the distinct insignia and the external fuel tanks. Crucially, the wings are clean. No live missiles are visible on the outer pylons. This is a deliberate choice by the adversary to maintain plausible deniability. It is a game of chicken played at Mach 1.5. This tactic is a carbon copy of maneuvers seen in the South China Sea and the Baltic, a familiar script written by those who want to project power without the consequences of a hot war. 6:28 a.m. The 4-7-minute aerial chess match. For the next 3/4 of an hour, the sky becomes a theater of gray zone tactics. The intruders perform diving passes, pulling up at the very last moment to simulate a bomb run on the carrier. They execute inverted rolls directly above the American fighters and drop to as low as 800 feet over the water, trying to lure the US pilots into a mistake. Then they suddenly climb to 3,000 feet, attempting to draw the Americans into a high-altitude radar lock. The US pilots remain disciplined, shadowing without crowding, tracking without locking. The Americans aren't just defending, they are learning the adversary's playbook in real time. 6:39 a.m. The breaking point. The tension reaches a fever pitch when one F-16 breaks formation and maneuvers into a steep dive aimed directly at the heart of the carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln. On the ship's perimeter, the Phalanx CIWS, the close-in weapon system, grinds into life. The white dome-shaped radar, affectionately known as R2D2, begins its lethal dance. It automatically tracks the incoming jet, calculating a firing solution that would unleash 4,500 rounds per minute of tungsten penetrators. The contrast is jarring, the cute appearance of the dome versus the terrifying lethality of its 20mm Vulcan cannon. The jet screams across the carrier's bow at 600 feet, close enough to vibrate the coffee cups in the wardroom. It is the thinnest line between a training exercise and a catastrophe. 651A. The silent departure. Then, as quickly as the tension peaked, it evaporates. Without a single radio transmission or parting gesture, the intruders bank north and simply leave. Their fuel gauges likely hit the bingo point, or perhaps they realized that every second they stayed, they were feeding more data into the American intelligence machine. There are 3 theories. It was a pre-planned training objective, a test of Australian U.S. integration, or a moment of sudden discretion. The Navy doesn't speculate. They simply watch as the blips fade from the SPY-6 displays, leaving the Pacific horizon empty and peaceful once again. As the intruders vanished into the northern haze, the most telling detail of the entire encounter wasn't what the US Navy did, but what it didn't do. Throughout the entire 47-minute provocation, the carrier strike group never once deviated from its charted course. It didn't change speed by a single knot, it didn't adjust its heading by a single degree. This calculated indifference is, in itself, a potent form of strategic communication. It sends a message that no amount of low-altitude passes or aggressive posturing can rattle the fundamental architecture of American sea power. You don't scare us, and you certainly don't dictate our movements. But while the surface appeared calm, the loot captured by the strike group's electronic sensors was staggering. This wasn't a wasted morning, it was an intelligence windfall. Every radar emission from the F-16S was captured, every frantic radio frequency used by their ground controllers was logged, and every subtle indicator of their operational doctrine was digitized. The Spy-6 and the accompanying electronic warfare suites didn't just watch the event, they built a comprehensive electronic profile of the adversary that will remain relevant for years. The intruders thought they were testing the Abraham Lincoln, but in reality they were voluntarily handing over their most sensitive technical secrets. By the time the jets landed back at their home base, their electronic signatures were already being analyzed by supercomputers in Hawaii and Virginia. The administration's gamble had paid off by simply standing its ground and keeping the sensors recording the U.S. turned a moment of potential conflict into a massive victory for long-term regional intelligence. When the ledger is finally balanced, the math for the adversary is devastating. For 47 minutes of aerial posturing, they burned through approximately $47 0 inches high-grade aviation fuel and maintenance cycles, a significant sum for a regional force. Yet the invisible costs were far higher. By engaging the strike group, they leaked electronic signatures worth millions of dollars in classified research, effectively blunting their own weapons before a real shot was ever fired. Strategically, the move backfired completely. Instead of intimidating Australia, it provided the perfect justification for an even larger permanent US presence in the region. In the end, they accomplished nothing: zero territorial gains, zero diplomatic concessions, and zero change to the American pattern of life in the Pacific. Predictably, within 48 hours, state-aligned media outlets began circulating heavily edited footage of the encounter. The headlines claimed a heroic retreat of the American carrier and spoke of a humiliated superpower, forced to flee from the region's superior defenders. It was a narrative designed for domestic consumption, a hollow attempt to turn a tactical failure into a propaganda victory. But the US Navy didn't respond with shouting. They responded with cold, hard data. They released the official navigation logs showing the strike group's position had remained unchanged to within a few meters for the duration of the event. The American response was laced with a dry, professional sarcasm, likening the intruders to aggressive seagulls at a beach picnic, annoying perhaps, but ultimately irrelevant to the mission. This is the reality of modern gray zone confrontation. One side pushes, yells, and films for social media. The other side remains silent, tracking every move and logging every weakness. The messages were exchanged not through diplomats but through radar pulses and flight patterns. While the adversary celebrated a fictional win online, the Americans quietly integrated the new data into their targeting computers, ensuring that the next time these jets meet, the outcome will be decided before the pilots even see each other. Ultimately, the deployment to the Australian coast reveals a fundamental truth about modern warfare. The most effective blow is the one you never have to strike. Some lessons are taught with explosions. This one was taught with indifference. The administration understood that by placing a carrier strike group in the path of encroaching influence, they weren't just defending a shoreline, they were defending an international order. The intruders came looking for a reaction, a moment of panic they could exploit for their own narrative of American decline. Instead, they got a shrug. This shrug is the cornerstone of a new strategic reality. By refusing to engage in the adversary's theatrical escalation, the U.S. and Australia demonstrated a level of confidence that is far more terrifying than any missile launch. They showed that the mere presence of American technology is enough to render hostile intent toothless. While the state-run cameras were rolling for a domestic audience, the real story was being written in the quiet rooms of naval intelligence. The adversary traded their most valuable electronic secrets for a few seconds of grainy propaganda footage. It was a trade that left them strategically bankrupt, exposed, and ultimately alone in a Pacific that remains as blue and American as ever. In the high-stakes game of Indo-Pacific dominance, the real power isn't in who shouts the loudest, but in who has the most data and the steadiest hand. This deployment proves that while rhetoric may change, the peace through strength doctrine remains the ultimate stabilizer in a world on edge. The question is no longer if we are preparing for war, but whether the other side realizes they've already lost the opening round.